When you look back at certain moments in your life, you'll realize that the situations you desperately wanted to work out, the ones you cried for, pleaded for, and held on to, were actually the exact situations you were being protected from. But you couldn't see it then. You thought something was being taken from you. You thought life was unfair. You thought the world was against you. Because when the door slammed, it felt personal. When the opportunity vanished, it felt like failure. When that relationship ended, it felt like heartbreak. You begged to stay in rooms where your soul was shrinking. You tried to force your way into spaces that were never built to hold you. And yet, something greater than your desire pulled you out. You might not have called it protection at the time. You might have called it betrayal. You might have called it rejection. You might have even called it punishment. But what if it was none of those things? What if it was grace disguised as loss? What if you weren't being pushed out? You were being rescued. Not because you were weak, but because you were too loyal to what was slowly destroying you. Sometimes we don't walk away because we don't trust that something better will come. We cling to what's familiar even if it's killing us because we'd rather deal with known pain than face the unknown. So life steps in, and it doesn't ask for permission. It tears you out of that situation. It closes the door you were too afraid to shut. And it breaks what needed to be broken, not to harm you, but to set you free. Think about all the times you tried to convince yourself to stay. The job that paid well but drained you to the bone. The friend who smiled in your face but stabbed you in the back. The lover who said the right words but never showed up with real action. You knew deep down something was off. Your gut screamed at you. Your peace evaporated, and still you tried to fix it. You tried to reason with dysfunction. You tried to negotiate your worth. But eventually that situation collapsed. It didn't matter how hard you worked. It didn't matter how much you loved. It ended anyway. That wasn't weakness. That wasn't failure. That was a higher hand pulling you out of a pit you didn't even recognize you were in. Because here's the truth, not every loss is a curse. Sometimes it's a cure. Sometimes the things we think we need are the very things keeping us from growing. And sometimes what feels like life falling apart is really life falling into place. But it won't feel like that in the beginning. It will feel brutal. You'll feel exposed. You'll question everything. Why now? Why me? What did I do wrong? But the real question isn't what did you lose? It's what did you gain in the absence of that loss? Space, peace, clarity, your identity, the freedom to finally be who you are without walking on eggshells or apologizing for your existence. That's not destruction. That's protection, and it's not just about avoiding harm. It's about being positioned for something better. The closed door isn't just a denial. It's a redirection. You're not being kicked out, you're being moved up, but elevation requires separation. You can't soar while dragging dead weight. You can't grow in soil that's toxic. So life clears the space. It rips up the roots. It removes the familiar so you can reach the extraordinary. And it rarely feels good in the moment. But hindsight, that's when it hits you. That job you didn't get led you to your purpose. That breakup you thought broke you was actually the beginning of your healing. That friend who ghosted you gave you room to find your tribe. What once felt like rejection became the very thing that saved your life. So stop chasing after the things that close themselves off to you. Stop mourning rooms you were never meant to sit in. Stop reopening wounds that were already stitched shut by grace. If it left, let it. If it closed, trust it. If it broke, rebuild without it. Because you're not being punished. You're being protected. Not everything lost was worth keeping. Not everything taken was stolen. Some things were removed because they were blocking your blessing, and your refusal to walk away didn't stop what was destined to end. Because protection doesn't wait for your approval. It doesn't need your permission. It steps in when you're too blind to see the danger or too tired to move. And it does the hard thing you were too scared to do yourself. You didn't fail. You were rescued. Not once, but again and again. And maybe it's time to stop grieving the door and start walking toward the one that's quietly waiting to open for you. Because you were never abandoned. You were being watched over. And that's not weakness. That's divine strength, choosing you even when you didn't choose yourself. People will fall away from your life without warning. And when it happens, you'll be tempted to take it personally. You'll start to question what you did wrong, where you failed, why they changed. You'll sit in silence, analyzing their distance, dissecting their words, replaying every moment trying to find the trigger. But the truth is, their absence might not be about you at all. Some people leave because their purpose in your life is finished. Some walk away because they were never meant to go the full distance with you, and some are removed, not because you failed, but because they were never equipped to stand beside the version of you that's rising. You think you lost something, but what if you were being cleared? What if their exit was protection, not punishment? There are moments in life where you don't get closure. You don't get a reason. The conversations don't happen, and the goodbyes aren't said, and it burns. It stings in a way that silence always does. But what hurts even more is trying to hold on to people who have already checked out. Their energy shifts. Their support fades. Their words feel hollow. And you try harder, speak softer, compromise more. But the gap widens anyway. And it's in that moment you need to understand. It's not about making them stay. It's about being brave enough to let them go. Because not everyone who starts with you is meant to finish with you. And not everyone who smiles at you is genuinely rooting for you. Some were only meant for a season, not your destiny. Sometimes the universe will clear people out quietly. No arguments. No big betrayals, just distance, silence, space. And while it may feel cruel in the moment, it's strategic. Because if you could see what was said behind your back, if you could feel the weight of the jealousy they carried, if you knew the way they minimized your wins while pretending to support you, you wouldn't mourn their absence. You'd thank life for the extraction. You'd realize that their presence was blocking your progress. That every time you leveled up, they got more uncomfortable. That the reason they started pulling away was because your growth made them insecure. You weren't too much. You were simply no longer manageable. Letting go of people you once trusted is painful. But holding on to people who secretly resent you is poison. It's slow. It's subtle. But it corrodes everything. It kills your confidence. It dulls your shine. It makes you second-guess your worth. That's what false loyalty does. It keeps you tied to people who clap when you're down and whisper when you rise. And you'll never fully elevate with that weight on your back. You can't move freely when you're walking on eggshells. You can't breathe deeply when you're constantly shrinking yourself to keep the peace. And you can't step into who you're meant to be while dragging those who only loved the older, smaller, more convenient version of you. So, when people begin to drift, don't chase. When they stop calling, don't beg. When they grow silent in your wins, don't explain. Accept the shift. Trust the space. Understand that growth will always expose what was never rooted deeply. Real loyalty doesn't vanish when you grow. Real support doesn't fade in your elevation. If they had to leave for you to breathe, that's protection. If their absence gave you clarity, that's a gift. If their distance created peace, that's alignment. You don't have to make sense of it. You don't need an apology. All you need is to recognize when someone's role in your story is over and honor that ending. There's a version of you that's waiting on the other side of release. A version that's lighter, freer, more focused. But you can't become that version while clinging to people who are draining you. The truth is, growth makes people uncomfortable. Your strength reminds them of what they haven't healed. Your confidence confronts their insecurity. Your movement highlights their stagnation. And instead of rising with you, they retreat. That's not your fault. That's their choice. And you have a choice to keep dimming or keep growing. Stay stuck or step forward. Cling to what's falling away or make room for what's rising within. Let the shifts happen. Let the people go. Let the connections fade, because every person removed is making space for someone aligned. Every empty chair is being cleared for the people who will truly see you, support you, grow with you. You don't need quantity. You need truth. You don't need crowds. You need alignment. And that only comes when you're willing to stop forcing what's no longer flowing. People were removed because your purpose demanded protection, and your future will thank you for every release you didn't resist. Let them fall away. Your path is protected even when it's painful. Sometimes you find yourself standing in the middle of a storm with no umbrella, no one to lean on, and no hand reaching out. Everything around you feels like it's falling apart. The people you thought would show up don't. The ones who promised to check in never call. And you're left in silence, wondering why no one sees your pain. But here's the truth you haven't told yourself yet. What if you were meant to stand alone in that moment? What if the silence wasn't abandonment, but protection? You want people to rescue you, to carry some of the weight, but what if that weight was never theirs to bear? What if those you needed were being held back, not to hurt you, but because you were being trained to realize just how powerful you are when no one shows up but you? There's a pattern that repeats in life when you're about to be elevated. Right before the breakthrough comes the stripping, the clearing, the isolation, and you fight it. You resist it. You label it loneliness. But it's not loneliness, it's preparation. Sometimes a higher power will pull everyone away not to punish you, but to reveal something deeper in you. A strength you forgot you had. A discipline you didn't think was yours. A voice inside you that only grows loud when the noise outside finally quiets down. You thought you needed them, but that was the lie. What you needed was to finally see yourself clearly, without distraction, without performance, without applause. People say they'll be there for you until it's inconvenient, until showing up costs them comfort, until your pain threatens their peace. And when they disappear, it cuts deep. But that cut is a doorway. Because in that space, in that wound, something sacred happens. You meet yourself. You face the parts of you that were always waiting to rise. You look around and realize you've been leaning too much, depending too much, hoping too much in others who never had the capacity to stand beside the real you. You were asking broken people to hold your healing. And when they dropped you, it hurt. But it was also honest. When people vanish in your hardest seasons, it's easy to feel cursed. But sometimes what feels like a curse is actually sacred. It's a separation that sets you apart for something greater, because not everyone is qualified to walk with you through transformation. Some would distract you from it. Some would sabotage it. Some would plant fear and doubt when you needed clarity and peace. Their absence isn't random, it's divine. You weren't being punished. You were being insulated. The pain made you feel alone, but it actually surrounded you with protection you couldn't see yet. Because not everyone who stands next to you in the light can survive the weight of your darkness. And you know what's wild? You survived. You walked through the fire. You felt the sting of being unseen, unheard, unsupported, and you didn't break. That should tell you something. That should change something. You don't need to beg for connection, for validation, for someone to stand next to you just so you can feel whole. That power you've been looking for in others, it's always been inside you. This isn't some motivational line. This is real. That silence, that solitude, it was a sacred classroom. You were being taught how to build yourself from the inside out, not with temporary support, but with unshakable strength. There's a version of you that can walk alone without crumbling. There's a version of you that knows how to sit in pain and still protect their peace. There's a version of you that doesn't chase people when they start to fade. And that version doesn't arrive when life is easy. It arrives when you're forgotten, when you're underestimated, when you're left behind. That's when your spirit stretches. That's when your character sharpens. That's when something bigger than you says, "This one's ready now." But you don't get there without solitude. You don't unlock that version of yourself if you're always surrounded, always comforted, always carried. So maybe you weren't abandoned. Maybe you were separated. Maybe the absence wasn't a gap but a gate. And maybe that silence wasn't a void. It was an invitation to hear something deeper, something more honest, something that whispers, "You're being protected, not because you're weak, but because you're about to rise." There are no shortcuts to that level of growth. There is no substitute for self-trust. No one can carry you to your purpose. And anyone who had to walk away for you to find it was never meant to stay. What you call a loss might be your greatest gain. And what looked like loneliness was your sacred place of becoming. There's something you've probably felt, but couldn't explain. That strange moment when your chest tightens for no reason. When something tells you to say no to an opportunity that looks perfect on paper. When you suddenly feel pulled to leave a place, to take a different route, to cancel a plan that doesn't make logical sense. And then something happens later. A betrayal you dodged, an accident you avoided, a disaster you never walked into. You tell yourself, that was lucky, or that was just instinct, but deep down it wasn't chance. It was something protecting you. Call it gut, call it divine, call it energy. But don't ignore it. That voice is not your fear. That voice is your protection. People talk about intuition like it's just a soft whisper or a hunch, but it's not weak. It's one of the strongest weapons you have. It's your early warning system. It kicks in when your mind is clouded by emotion. When logic wants to argue. When ego wants to be liked. That internal signal doesn't care about being polite or making sense to anyone else. It tells you when something is wrong. Even when everything looks right. But too many people override it. They silence that voice. They push past it in the name of being agreeable, rational, or optimistic. And every time they do, they walk straight into chaos they could have avoided. That's not intuition failing. That's you ignoring your protection. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it shows up in quiet ways. The friend you suddenly feel cold toward without knowing why. The room that drains your energy the second you walk in. The opportunity that sounds great, but keeps triggering a knot in your stomach. We live in a world that worships logic and dismisses inner knowing. But if you've lived long enough, you've learned the truth. Your spirit knows what your eyes can't see yet. And if you're paying attention, you'll realize those strange feelings, those nudges, those red flags you can't explain. That's not imagination, that's insight. That's your soul trying to protect your future. You want clarity. Stop second guessing what you feel deep down. Stop silencing the signals because they don't match the surface. If something feels off, it usually is. Not everything that glitters is good. Not every smiling face is safe, and not every invitation is alignment. Sometimes the danger isn't outside, it's in the charm, the flattery, the too good to be true. And your gut knows it, you just have to respect it, because that tension in your body, that discomfort, that hesitation, it's not paranoia. It's data. It's your higher intelligence warning you in ways your mind doesn't fully understand yet. So the next time your heart tells you to pause, even when there's no clear reason, pause. Don't argue. Don't rationalize. Don't talk yourself out of your own wisdom. Protection doesn't always come with flashing lights and sirens. Sometimes it comes in silence, in stillness, in that quiet sense of no. And you don't owe anyone an explanation for honoring that. You don't need to justify your boundaries, your exits, your instincts. If something feels wrong, you don't stay just because it looks right. That's how you betray yourself. That's how you lose time, peace, energy, and sometimes safety. You don't need all the facts to protect yourself. You don't need everyone to agree with your decisions. You don't need to wait for proof that someone's not right for you. You don't need permission to trust what your soul is screaming, because that inner alarm you keep silencing is the very thing keeping you from destruction. It's not your job to make others comfortable at the expense of your truth. It's your job to listen when the warning comes. Even if it's inconvenient, even if it's unpopular, even if you don't understand it yet. Because often, you won't realize why you were being warned until months later. When something explodes, when the mask slips, when the cost becomes clear. And by then, you'll either be grateful you listened, or broken because you didn't. Every powerful person you know has mastered this one thing. They don't argue with their instincts. They don't delay on red flags. They don't need to see the fire before they evacuate. They feel the smoke, they sense the shift, and they move. That's what strength looks like. It's not just fighting the storm. It's avoiding the unnecessary one. That's what protection is. It's prevention, and it only works if you honor it when it whispers, not just when it screams. So start listening to what doesn't make sense. Start trusting what your body tells you. Stop waiting for disasters to prove what your spirit already knew. The sooner you respect your inner warnings, the fewer regrets you'll carry. You won't need closure from people who were never meant to have access. You won't need apologies from those who were never safe. You won't need rescue from situations you were never supposed to enter. Because the protection was always there. The signal was always sounding. The question is, were you listening? When life starts falling apart, when relationships shatter, careers stall, people walk away, you feel abandoned. You think you're being punished, like something's being taken from you. But what if that collapse isn't punishment? What if it's protection? What if everything falling apart is actually everything falling into place? See, you're not always supposed to understand it in the moment. You're not supposed to have clarity while you're standing in the storm. Because growth doesn't come from comfort. It comes from disruption. And sometimes the most violent shake-ups are the most sacred interventions. You've been clinging to things that no longer serve you. A toxic friendship you keep justifying. A job that drains you. A relationship that chips away at your worth. You stay because it's familiar. Because you're scared of the unknown. Because leaving feels like failure. So life steps in. It starts removing what you don't have the strength to walk away from. It gets louder when you ignore the signs. The silence grows between you and that friend. The chaos multiplies in that relationship. The discomfort in that workplace turns into dread. And you start wondering why everything feels so heavy. But you're not being buried. You're being rerouted. It hurts. There's no denying that. It hurts when people leave. It hurts when plans crumble. It hurts when the version of life you thought you wanted dissolves in front of you. But the hurt isn't the end. It's the clearing. It's the pruning before new growth. It's the discomfort before the upgrade. You just can't see the bigger picture yet. You think you lost something, but what you really lost was a barrier. You think it's over. But what's over is the cycle that was quietly killing you. You've been protected by delay, by rejection, by endings that didn't make sense at the time. Because if you had gotten what you wanted back then, it would have destroyed you. That job you didn't get, that person who stopped calling, that opportunity that slipped. What if that was divine timing doing its job? What if you were being blocked from a smaller life because you're meant for more? You only see the missing piece, the empty space, the silence. But you're not seeing the danger that was on the other side of your wish. You don't see the betrayal that would have followed that perfect partner, the burnout that would have come from that dream job. The slow erosion of your self-worth that would have happened if you had stayed one more year in that toxic space. The universe doesn't always use words. It uses disruption. And if you're wise, you'll stop calling that disruption a curse and start recognizing it as protection. Some people were removed to protect your peace. Some paths were blocked to protect your purpose. Some relationships ended because they were distractions, not destinations. And you don't need to chase what left. You don't need to mourn what expired. You don't need to fight for access to what rejected you. If it's not aligned anymore, let it go. If it walked away, let it stay gone. Because your protection doesn't always come wrapped in comfort. Sometimes it's wrapped in heartbreak, in silence, in absence, in endings. And it doesn't feel like a blessing until you're further down the road. Until you've healed, grown, elevated. And then you look back and realize, that fall saved me. You're so focused on the door that closed, you're missing the room it was keeping you from. You're so obsessed with the loss, you're blind to the danger that was tied to it. You want to go back. You want to fix it. You want to reopen what's been shut. But the reason it's not opening isn't because you're not enough. It's because you've outgrown it. And if it reopened, you'd shrink yourself to fit inside it again. You'd go back to doubting yourself, settling, tolerating less than you deserve. So it stays closed. Not as punishment, but as protection. Not because you lost, but because you're being positioned. What's meant for you won't need force. It won't confuse your spirit. It won't require you to sacrifice your peace. So when things fall apart, don't fall with them. Rise above them. Ask yourself, what is this teaching me? Not, why is this happening to me? Because the more you resist the fall, the longer you delay your elevation. You can't build on shaky foundations. You can't grow in contaminated soil. Sometimes the collapse is the only way to clear the ground and start again. And what grows after the fall is always stronger, purer, and more aligned with your true self. So stop clinging to what ended. Stop romanticizing what's gone. Stop begging for things that aren't meant for your future. If something walked out, let it. If it crumbled, rebuild better. If it hurts, let it teach you. Because you're not being punished. You're being redirected. And the faster you accept that, the faster you heal. The more you resist, the more it drags on. But once you surrender, once you stop asking, why me, and start trusting the process, you'll see it, you'll feel it, you'll understand it, you'll know without a doubt. You weren't being abandoned, you were being protected. When things start slipping through your fingers, opportunities, people, moments, you immediately feel like you're failing. Like you missed a shot, lost a blessing, wasted your time. But what if you didn't lose anything at all? What if something greater stepped in, not to take something away, but to make space for what's truly meant for you? Sometimes protection doesn't come in the form of something arriving. It comes in the form of something leaving. And even though it breaks your heart, even though it brings silence where there used to be laughter, what's removed from your life is often more important than what stays. It takes a higher kind of vision to see that what's being pulled away is being pulled for your protection, not your punishment. You never see it right away. You always feel the sting first. The silence, the absence, the disconnection. You scroll back through old texts wondering what changed. You replay conversations in your head. You ask yourself if it was something you said, something you didn't say, something you missed. You think, if I'd done this differently, maybe they'd still be here. Maybe I wouldn't have lost that job. Maybe that door would have opened. But here's the hard truth. You didn't lose it. It lost access to you. And if it walked away from you, if it couldn't value you, if it couldn't grow with you, if it only drained you or distracted you or delayed you, then it was never aligned in the first place. It was temporary, seasonal, transitional, and its departure is part of your evolution. See, growth is messy. Growth is lonely. Growth will require you to outgrow people, places, patterns, and most people aren't ready for that. So when you start evolving, when you stop gossiping, stop settling, stop tolerating behavior that disrespects your peace, the people who only knew the smaller version of you will fall away. And that's when the pain kicks in. Because you were used to that version of you. You were used to that environment, that friendship, that relationship, that routine. So when life starts pulling it away, you panic. You reach back. You try to hold on. You think you're being tested. But the test isn't about getting them back. It's about whether you trust yourself enough to let go. It takes a different kind of strength to not chase what's leaving, to not try to fix what's broken, to not cling to what no longer fits. It takes discipline to trust the loss, to say, if this is being removed, there must be a reason. Even if it hurts, even if it breaks you, even if it leaves a silence that echoes in your chest, that silence is sacred. Because that's where you rebuild. That's where you reset your standards. That's where you learn to be okay without the things you once thought you couldn't live without. And once you master that silence, once you embrace the lesson in the loss, you stop seeking approval. You stop chasing closure. You stop needing validation from people who couldn't even show up consistently. You don't need their explanation. You don't need the full story. Sometimes, closure is accepting the fact that they made their choice and you make yours. Your peace is not up for negotiation. Your growth is not up for compromise. And if someone's absence brings more peace than their presence ever did, that's not a loss. That's liberation. But you've got to be honest with yourself. Are you mourning their absence, or the version of yourself that needed them? Are you missing them, or just addicted to the familiarity they brought, even when it hurt? Everything that left wasn't a tragedy. Some of it was a rescue. You were rescued from betrayal you didn't see coming, from stress you normalized, from a cycle you kept repeating. And life got loud when you wouldn't listen. It forced change when you got too comfortable. It stripped away what you used to find security in, because you were settling for less than you were built for. And now that you're on the other side, now that you've survived the fallout, the question isn't, why did this happen to me? The real question is, what did it save me from? And that's where the healing starts. Not in getting answers from the people who disappeared, not in understanding why the door closed, but in trusting that it was supposed to. In believing that your protection came disguised as rejection. In choosing to believe that what left made room for what's next. You can't heal if you keep reopening the wound. You can't move forward if you keep chasing what hurt you. You can't receive your future if your hands are still gripping your past. Let it go. Not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to know it doesn't belong in the next chapter. You are being guided, even when it feels like you're being abandoned. You are being shaped, even when it feels like you're being shattered. You are being aligned, even when everything feels off. So when you feel the shift, don't resist it. When the silence comes, sit with it. When something ends, honor the ending. Because not everything that breaks you is meant to destroy you. Sometimes it's breaking you open. Sometimes it's clearing the path. Sometimes it's saving you from what you couldn't yet see. And that is protection in its rawest, realist form. When you find yourself being rejected, by someone you trusted, by a workplace you gave your all to, by life itself, it doesn't just sting, it wounds your identity. You start to question your worth. You internalize the rejection as a reflection of your inadequacy. You think maybe if you had shown up differently, given more, said less, been louder or quieter, it wouldn't have happened. But here's what most people never pause to realize: sometimes rejection isn't about you at all. Sometimes rejection is the redirection you were too loyal to take on your own. Sometimes rejection is divine intervention that rips away what you were too afraid to release. It doesn't feel kind in the moment. It feels brutal. But that's often how protection begins. It shows up in the form of closed doors and final goodbyes. Because if something had stayed, it would have cost you more than it ever gave. But in your loyalty, in your blindness, in your comfort zone, you couldn't see it. You see, there's a lesson we all fight, but it's the one that changes everything. You are not for everyone. And not everyone is for you. Some people were sent to be a lesson, not a lifetime. And the faster you learn that, the faster you heal. You cannot force belonging where you were never meant to fit. You cannot beg for a seat at a table that only values your silence. The moment you realize you were being pushed out because you were never supposed to stay is the moment you stop apologizing for outgrowing what no longer nourishes you. That is the quiet power of rejection. It's a message, and it's not saying, you're not enough. It's saying, this isn't your place. And even then, you'll try to force it. You'll try to go back. You'll try to explain yourself, overgive, prove your value. Because it's in our nature to cling to the familiar, even when it's toxic. You're not weak for wanting to make it work. You're human. But that desire to be accepted can cost you everything if you don't learn to read the room. If your presence feels like pressure to others, if your voice gets smaller every time you show up, if your soul shrinks when you walk through that door, you're being told something. Rejection, in that case, is the loudest whisper from life that says, you don't belong here? Not because you're not enough, but because you've outgrown this level. And outgrowing hurts. People romanticize growth, but it's not always empowering. It's isolating. Because as you rise, you realize that not everyone wants to come with you. Some people are only comfortable with the version of you that played small, agreed silently, stayed quiet, didn't question things. And the moment you start choosing yourself, the moment you stop shrinking, they feel threatened. That's when the rejection comes. Not because you failed, but because you dared to evolve. That's not a punishment. That's a signal. Your light became too bright for their shadows, and their reaction is not your responsibility to fix. The most painful part about rejection is the silence that follows. That feeling of being erased without a proper ending. Of being ghosted, overlooked, forgotten. But that silence, it's where you meet your real strength. It's where you stop performing for acceptance. It's where you build identity on truth, not validation. It's where you learn to say, I am still worthy even if they didn't see it. I still matter, even if they forgot me. And that self-worth, forged in the furnace of rejection, is unshakable. Because now you're no longer relying on external approval. You've built your foundation on something deeper. You are not disposable. You are not an afterthought. You are not broken because someone didn't choose you. And maybe that rejection hurt because you had dreams attached to it. Maybe you saw a future with them. Maybe you planned years around that opportunity. And when it vanished, it felt like your whole identity collapsed with it. But your value does not leave when people exit. Your purpose doesn't disappear because a door closed. In fact, sometimes it's only in the rejection that you find the clarity to pursue what's actually aligned with you. Rejection strips away the illusion. It removes what distracts, it wakes you up. And when you finally stop seeing rejection as a wound and start seeing it as wisdom, that's when everything shifts. You stop blaming yourself. You stop obsessing over, what if? You stop going back to places that already told you you're not welcome. You start asking better questions. What did this teach me? Where is this trying to lead me? Who am I when I'm no longer trying to be accepted by people who don't even know how to value real? And the answers you find will rebuild you. They'll make you smarter, stronger, sharper. Rejection is never easy. But it is necessary. It's not a step back. It's a clearing. It's not the end. It's a redirection. And once you truly understand that, once you own that truth, you'll stop fighting what's leaving and start preparing for what's coming. You'll trust the closed door. You'll thank the unanswered message. You'll release the need to chase. And instead of asking, why me? You'll ask, what now? That is the shift. That is the power. That is the protection. Sometimes protection doesn't come with warning signs or flashing lights. It comes quietly through instincts you can't explain. Through moments that don't make sense at the time, but later reveal themselves as crucial pivots. There are times when something in you just knows not to go to that meeting, not to trust that person, not to take that trip, not to say yes to that offer. And you don't know why, but you feel it, that tension in your chest, that hesitation in your gut, that unexplainable shift in your energy. It's subtle. And if you're not paying attention, you'll call it anxiety or nerves or overthinking. But it's none of those things. It's wisdom disguised as discomfort. It's intuition rooted in something bigger than logic. When something in you whispers no, even when the world screams, yes, listen, that's protection. And it often shows up before the danger does. We've been trained to ignore it, to be reasonable, to say yes to people we don't trust, to environments we don't feel safe in, to situations that drain us. Because we don't want to offend anyone, because we're afraid of looking dramatic. But the cost of ignoring that internal signal is far greater than the discomfort of honoring it. Every time you override your intuition, you betray yourself. And every time you betray yourself, you become easier to manipulate, easier to mistreat, easier to lead away from your truth. That's how people get trapped. In jobs that kill their spirit, in relationships that destroy their peace, in places they were never meant to stay. Not because the signs weren't there, but because they didn't trust themselves enough to leave. Intuition doesn't always explain itself, and that's the part that scares people. We want reasons, proof, evidence. But that's not how it works. The very nature of inner knowing is that it often goes against what's logical. It doesn't play by the rules of the mind. It's older than thought. It speaks in feelings, in senses, in gut reactions that we've inherited for survival. And when you honor it, it sharpens. The more you listen, the louder it gets. The more you act on it, the more it guides you. But the more you ignore it, the quieter it becomes, until eventually you forget what your own truth sounds like. People love to call intuition woo-woo or irrational. But what's irrational is staying in places that drain your soul just because they look good on paper. What's irrational is pretending you're fine when every cell in your body is screaming otherwise. The most powerful thing you can do is make choices based on your inner truth, not external approval. Because here's what happens when you do that. You start avoiding the wrong people before they have the chance to hurt you. You leave before the betrayal. You decline the offer that looked good but was never aligned. You take a different route that, in hindsight, saved your life. These moments don't always come with clarity up front, but they always leave behind evidence. Looking back, you'll see the moments when your inner knowing was spot on. You'll remember the chills you felt right before something went wrong. You'll remember how your energy dropped every time you were around a certain person. You'll remember how uneasy you felt saying yes to that project, to that friend, to that space, and how later the truth surfaced. That is not coincidence. That is not luck. That is protection. Some of the biggest blessings in your life will come from listening to that voice. And some of the biggest disasters will come from ignoring it. Learn the difference between fear and warning. Fear says, you can't. Intuition says, you shouldn't. Fear paralyzes. Intuition guides. Fear is noisy and overwhelming. Intuition is quiet and clear. If it feels heavy, contracted, frantic, that's fear. If it feels calm but firm, gentle but unwavering, that's intuition. That's how you know. But you can't hear it in chaos. You can't hear it when your life is too loud. You've got to get still. You've got to spend enough time alone to know what your own energy feels like, so you can recognize when something or someone disrupts it. You've got to unplug from the noise long enough to recognize the difference between your truth and someone else's projection. That clarity only comes in silence. And in that silence, you'll begin to recognize patterns. You'll start to see that every time you've been saved from something, it didn't always make sense in the moment. But later, It made all the sense in the world. There's a power in trusting what you feel, even when you can't explain it. It's not your job to make your inner wisdom make sense to others. It's your job to follow it. To protect your peace. To honor what doesn't sit right with your spirit. Because the truth is, no one else has to live with the consequences of your choices. Only you do. So why live your life based on what other people think is best when your own soul already knows? You don't need a reason to walk away from something that doesn't feel right. You don't need permission to choose peace over chaos. You don't owe anyone an explanation for honoring what you know. That knowing, that deep inner compass, is your direct line to protection. And every time you listen to it, you become stronger, safer, and more in alignment with the life you're meant to live.